Firstly, there is a recognition that by looking at ESG issues, there's potentially value to create, certainly value to protect, and certainly risk to be managed better. And I think a second and key aspect is the pressure that we're seeing from stakeholders. And obviously in the private equity world, a key stakeholder are the limited partners, the LPs. So when I joined Doughty Hanson 7.5 years ago, the key driver for my hire was a recognition from senior management that there's something to ESG that will enhance the portfolio companies and make them better businesses. But also at the same time, they were starting to see a number of requests coming in from certain LPs, mainly the pension funds. It was probably around 5 or 6 questionnaires a year at that time, very superficial questions. And in the 7 years that I've been in the firm, that's quadrupled, more than quadrupled in terms of the number of requests that we get from LPs. And they're much more sophisticated in their approach to asking certain questions of us and wanting to see tangible evidence that we have not just written a policy on ESG, but actually implemented it and got something from it. So I'm a team of 1, but I have my virtual network. And what we mean by that is I have a network of consultants that I've known through working in the sector for the last 20 odd years. People I've known from my time in industry. But critically, we have the portfolio. Usually you will find real experts in the companies that we own on specific topics relating to ESG. And so finding those people, engaging with those people and building rapport and trust is critical. But then making sure you leverage those skills across the fund. So for example, if we know that we've experienced ESG issues before at a particular company by virtue of building a new facility in, say, Mexico, then simply putting those people in touch with a company that we know are looking to build a factory in a similar place. Well, supply chain is a critical issue, particularly when you're thinking about business ethics, responsible sourcing, sustainable sourcing of raw materials. It's probably more of an issue for some sectors than others, and it's a judgment call that I would make with deal team colleagues. But it's always a question we ask. It may be a fairly high-level question, but it's always a question we ask around how do we address ESG issues within supply chain? So how do the portfolio companies view supply chain risk from an ESG perspective? Do they have a formal procurement supply chain function that's asking questions around responsible sourcing, for example? Now, the reality is, during due diligence, we aren't often given the luxury of being able to visit all of the suppliers. In fact, that's never really going to happen in the real world. But you can get a sense for how companies view supply chain risk and whether they're looking at supply chain risk from an ESG perspective, just by asking a few generic questions. Now, for me as an in-house practitioner, I know that I can always pick up those issues with deal team colleagues during the holding period. And so where we see a company that may have exposure to certain responsible investing supply chain issues, then we'll pick those up during the holding period. So it's a continuation really of the due diligence process, but making sure we drill down into those issues during that holding period. The time frame is important, and the reality is that the deal team are under pressure to get deals done. They might be in a competitive process. So any questions that you ask or want the deal team to ask on your behalf on ESG need to be mission critical. So as a specialist and a practitioner, I need to be thinking about, well, what's the 1-2 questions I have to make sure is asked at this early stage, given the pressures we're under, to get a real sense for how ESG is at a particular company. Another challenge more broadly is the perception that ESG isn't material or isn't that important to the deal. It's very rare for ESG to be a material issue in the sense that it will stop a deal from happening. But having said that, if some of these issues are not addressed or understood at due diligence and addressed during the holding period, then you are going to be exposed when it comes to exit from the perspective of someone trying to price chip, take value away from an exit multiple. Or potentially you're exposed to reputational harm, and in the worst case scenario, perhaps a product boycott. So all of those issues are important, particularly, for example, if you're looking to IPO a business.